Okay, I'm going to do a little video here for the problem that we skipped yesterday. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to kind of review the steps and kind of back into this so that we can work through it together. So here is the problem. U.S. government is contracted with Raytheon to build Peacekeeper 2 ballistic missiles. The project has been laid out with durations in weeks. Predecessors and costs below. So I'm going to copy this table into Excel. And the question is, which of the following is the critical path? If you wanted to shorten the duration of the project, which activity would you crash first? What's the weekly crash cost of this activity? And then finally, crash the problem from 17 to 14 weeks. So the first thing we need to do is we need to do a little draw here. We need to draw out what this project is.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you are a ticket for passenger flight number 690 going to DC-8, ladies and gentlemen, your plane has been delayed.
So here's the project, and we can see that A goes to C and D. Here's the predecessors, so it's going to C and D. C and D are going to G. C and D are going to G. B is going to E. There's B to E. And E is going to F, or D to F. What I've done is I've put in these durations. And let me just make sure they are correct. I've actually changed some a little bit, so let me go back to the default, which was 64438. And now, if you do the original mapping of the project, A is 3, B is 7, and I'm looking at these normal times and making sure these normal times for each activity are correct. C is 6, D is 4, E is 4, F is 3, and G is 8. Okay, so this is our original configuration. One of the first things we need to do here is calculate a crash. Let's call this a weekly crash cost. And how do we calculate this? We're going to take the crash cost minus the normal cost in parentheses divided by open parentheses normal time minus crash time. What we're looking for is a per week crash cost. So this crash cost here is not a per week crash cost, but that's what we need to crash the project, is we need a weekly crash cost. And so we're going to divide the difference here between the normal cost and the crash cost by the difference between the normal amount of time and the crashed amount of time. For activity A, we can only crash this 1 week. That's as much as we can. We simply cannot crash it any more than 1 week. So once we have our crash cost here, we can copy this down for each one of these activities. We have an $800 crash cost for activity A, and so forth all the way down to activity G, which is $132.50. Now that we have a crash cost, what we can do is we can identify where the critical path is. What is the critical path? So if we go back to our project, the critical path is this path with no slack time. And slack time is the difference between these two numbers or the difference between these two numbers for each activity. The difference between 17 and 17 is 0. The difference between 9 and 9 is 0 for G. So this is on the critical path. There is no slack time. Notice all the slack time down here, right? B, E, and F. There's 3 weeks of slack time here, 3 weeks here, 3 weeks here. Even D has 2 weeks of crash time, or excuse me, slack time for D. But ACG is the critical path. So when we look at the critical path, and it's asking us in the question, what is the critical path? The critical path is going to be ACG. That is the critical path. That's the path that takes the longest. It takes 17 weeks to finish, and there's no slack time in any of those activities. So that is the critical path. If you wanted to shorten the duration of the project, which activity would you crash first? So this question is asking, if we really wanted to shorten the project, first we know that it has to be an activity on the critical path. If we shorten any of these other activities, we're not going to shorten the overall project. We've got to shorten the critical path, which is one of these three activities. Second, which one is the cheapest one? A, C, or G? Now we're going to come over here and look at this weekly crash cost. So if we're looking at A, C, or G, which one is the cheapest one? Well, it turns out G is the cheapest one. So if we wanted to crash, we would crash G first. Why? Because it's on the critical path, first of all, and second of all, it's the cheapest of the three activities to crash. And it looks like we can crash G twice. That would be our maximum number of crashes, would be twice. So the question here is, which activity would we crash first? It would be G. Next question, what is the weekly crash cost of the activity selected in question? This one is the $132.50. So we'll type that in. Last question, crash the project from 17 to 14 weeks. What is the total cost of crashing the project? Just the additional cost, not the total project cost. So we're looking at the crash cost here. And we've already determined that to crash the first week, we would crash activity G. We know the critical path for this week is ACG, right? We've already established that ACG is the critical path. If we want to go from 17 to 16, because we're trying to crash the project just 1 week at a time, we would crash activity G first. How much is that going to cost us? That's going to be the $132.50. If we crash G once, and again, we have to do this week by week. Why? Because the critical path could change. So we have to do it week by week. So what I'm going to come over here is the way I've got this spreadsheet set up is I'm going to remove 1 week from G. I'm going to go from 8 to 7 weeks in G. Notice when I make this change, G is now 7 here, and we've shortened the project to 16 weeks. It cost us $132.50, but we are now shorter by 1 week. But we need to go to 14 weeks. So this gets us down to 16 weeks, right? In fact, let's do this. Let's say we started at 17, and the crash duration is like the new duration after we crash. That is 16 weeks. So this is how we went from 17 to 16. Now we need to go from 16 to 15. And the first question we're going to ask is, what is the critical path? It turns out ACG is still the critical path. There's slack here. There's slack here. Notice it's less slack now. It's only 2 days of slack. See how we're cutting into the slack because the overall project duration is decreasing? So we know the critical path is still ACG. There's no slack here. This is still the longest path. The question is ACG. Which one is the cheapest one? Turns out those costs don't change. It's going to be G every time. But the last question we have to be careful of is how many times can G be crashed? We've already crashed it once. We can only crash it one more time to 6, but we can still crash it. So we're going to crash G. That's going to cost us $132.50. The new duration is now 15. If we look at the duration here, I'm going to crash it to 6 over here, and this is going to feed into my diagram over here. Now, because G is 6, we've crashed it twice. It started at 8. We've crashed it down to 6. The duration is now 15 weeks overall. This is good, but we need to go a little bit more. We need to get to 14. So now, has the critical path changed? And what we do is we look for slack. No, there's still slack here. There's still slack here, although it's just 1 week. But this means that ACG is still the longest path, and it is the critical path. And there's no slack. So ACG is still the critical path. The problem or the challenge here is, okay, wait a minute, we've crashed G twice. We can't crash G anymore. Which way are we going to crash next? We go to the next cheapest option in ACG. We know we have to crash one of these activities, AC or G. C now is the least expensive option because we can't crash G anymore. G is maxed out. We simply can't shorten G. And the only way to shorten this project is to crash C. So we're going to crash C this 3rd week, when that's going to cost us $200. That's going to get the project down to 14 weeks. And then all we have to do is sum up this weekly crash cost, which I've done right here. And that is the crash cost. So if we pay $465 across 3 weeks, we can short, well, across one, yeah, we can, I say across 3 weeks, but it would be shortening the project by 3 weeks. If we pay $465, we can shorten the overall project from 17 to 14 weeks. So I'll copy this information. I'll put it into here. How did I do? And we are good to go. Hopefully this is helpful. Thanks.